Oh, perfect. I probably talked to Jessica, she's in the music. I will call to order tonight's meeting of the Jersey Area School District for March the 28th, 2022. Roll call, Mr. Enders.
Mr. Allen. Mrs. Calhoun.
Here.
Ms. Dobler.
Here.
Mrs. Edwards.
Here.
Mrs. Grant.
Here.
Mr. Kinley. Mrs. Petrosky.
Here.
Mrs. Stemler. Here. Mrs. Thomas.
Here.
All 9 members present.
Next will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'd like to call forward Mr. Jean to introduce students for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good evening, Board. It gives me great pleasure to introduce 2 of our 5th grade students at Salisbury. One in Mr. Glorioso's room, and that would be Landon Armbruster, if you would come up, please. And the other 5th grader in Mrs. Ditmore's class is Dominic Ditmore. So at this time, they're going to lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Landon and Dominic, if you could come up here for a second, please. Mr. Jean, don't leave. We'll get your picture. I heard you had the national anthem ready for us to sing tonight.
Terrifying.
Oh, come on.
Now, so we get a picture here.
Mr. Jean, you can be in the picture, please. Thank you, boys.
Next will be approval of the minutes for February the 14th, 2022, and February 28th of 2022. May I have a motion?
Second.
Questions? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Not in favor, nay. Ayes have it. Moving on to the treasurer's report for February, well, you didn't put that. 2022 treasurer's report and February 2022 investment report. May I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Not in favor, nay. Ayes have it. Next will be approval of the bills for $3,028,402.20. May I have a motion? Can someone second?
I heard Mr. Allen.
Oh, okay. Any questions on the bills?
Just so you're aware, Board, really nothing unusual in these bills. There is 3 months of payments to Sugar Valley Rural Charter School, just shy of $350,000. That's in the general fund month-end checks. Outside of that, it's been a kind of a normal month.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
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 Not in favor, nay. Ayes have it. Moving on to presentations. The first one is communications.
I would like to recognize this evening that today, Dr. Dady and I recognize Mrs. Lindsay Yon, kindergarten teacher at Salisbury Elementary, as Employee of the Month for February. I don't know, I think I did share this story with the board. We had a day that the weather was not the greatest, and Mrs. Yon had trouble leaving her driveway that morning, but she made Shoe Leather Express work, and she got to school. And I think I still have a video of her coming down the woods behind Salisbury Elementary, and that was the reason that all of her colleagues recommended her for Employee of the Month. So she was Employee of the Month for February. That's all.
President's report, we had an executive session at 5:45 before the meeting. We will be holding one after the meeting, and there will be no further agenda items voted on after that executive session. IU report, Jesse.
Nothing.
Student reps?
Good evening. My name is Madeline Gerst, and I'm the Senior Student School Board Representative. I just have a few things here to share with you guys. The third marking period ended last Wednesday, making way for the last stretch of the school year. We have only 42 days of school left. I only know that because we have a countdown going in my homeroom. As a reward for all students without any write-ups or detentions and such, the Uptown Music Collective is coming to the high school sometime in May. They will put on a live show for all who are eligible to help celebrate the end of the school year. The high school did a fundraiser last Friday for Hayden Hall. Hayden is a Jersey Shore Middle School student who had her spinal cord bumped during her second scoliosis surgery. She is now in a wheelchair. Thankfully, Key Club was able to organize a Hats for Hayden Day. Students were able to wear a hat at school for $1, but many students and staff donated much more than that. We were able to raise $800 for Hayden and her family, so that's a big success. I'm a member of the yearbook staff, and I'm happy to announce that we made our last deadline recently. We are well on our way to selling out the rest of the yearbooks with only 34 left. We have been surpassing all of our goals and are shooting to win the Jostens Yearbook 2022 Program of Excellence Gold Level Award again this year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Superintendent's report.
I want to start this evening by calling forward Croc Herman. I'm going to have him help me recognize two of our athletes that qualified for states. Hayden and Brock, sorry, if you could come up here, please. Brock and Hayden both qualified for states in wrestling. I invited them here tonight to hand out their certificates. Thank you to Coach for your hard work. And thanks to both of you for your hard work. If you could all turn around, Dr. Dady's ready for a picture. Thank you, guys. And Mr. Palumbo, if you could come up here, please. I'm going to ask Mr. Palumbo to help me recognize Reese Charney. Reese I've lost the word. Represented the school district at states for swimming. Thank you, Reese. Thank you, Mr. Palumbo. Turn around for your picture. And on your right, on the screen over there, we have Mrs. Jamie Doyle, who you've met before. This is about the time of the year that Jamie gets to come visit us. Jamie's going to update your financials in terms of your bond payments. The presentation she's going to share with you, I did put in your weekly update last week. It looks very similar to what you saw last year, except for the numbers obviously are updated to reflect the current scenario. In addition, She included in there for you scenarios. Those scenarios ask the question, what if you borrowed money to your current annual debt payment when your debt payment ends? And what does it look like if you went up in $500,000 increments? So when you look at that packet, and Jamie will review this, but this is a pretty standard presentation for her. Many of you that have heard from her before have seen this information presented in this way, but I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and draw your attention to that information that was attached to last week's update. Jamie.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for allowing
Give
me
us
to
a second,
participate
Jamie. We got to
virtually.
turn you up.
Okay, very good.
Try again.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me loud and clear now?
Nope. Hold on a minute. Yeah, do we need to hold a mic over there? Try it now.
How about now? Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Nope. You can have I'll bring my mic over. Oh, try it now.
Testing, 1, 2,
Oh,
3.
much better.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for allowing me to participate virtually this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I am screen sharing if that's helpful. I understand you have hard copies as well. But we'll start on the first page. I always like to start off talking a little bit about market conditions and the interest rate environment. So the first page is 3 snapshots of the same index. And this is the Mmd Index, which stands for Municipal Marketplace Data. And what the top snapshot tells us, we're currently at the blue line. So not only are we at historically low interest rate levels, but the yield curve is also very, very flat, meaning rates aren't that much different in year 1 as they are out here in year 30. So both of those conditions are great when you're thinking about borrowing for capital improvement programs. The middle snapshot just shows this same index going all the way back to 1993 to give you a more historic perspective. And you can see we're at the far right-hand side, and interest rates have been ticking upward over the course of 2022 so far. But again, still very attractive levels in the grand scheme of things. And if you look at the left-hand side of this middle chart, that blue line that's labeled current. So for this index, this rate is currently a 1.95%, and only 18.69% of the time between 1993 and today have interest rates been lower than they are today. So again, excellent interest rate environment in the historic picture of things. If you look at the bottom snapshot, it's just a blow up of that red box in the middle snapshot. So you can really get a bird's eye view of what has happened over calendar year 2020, 2021, and so far here in the first quarter of 2022. So you can see the big spike upward when COVID became a reality and the stay-at-home order was issued. You can see the all-time low interest rates that were set in August of 2020. You can see the interest rate environment has wiggled around a little bit since then. And you can see so far in 2022, it has pretty much increased and is expected to increase. We're definitely in a rising interest rate environment. The Federal Reserve Committee took action at their meeting a couple of weeks ago and increased short-term overnight lending rates by 0.25%. And it's widely anticipated they're going to increase again at their May meeting, possibly 0.5%, and again in June, possibly 0.5%. So we take all of those things into consideration when we're putting together a plan of finance. We're always conservative this early on in the process, and especially knowing we're in a rising interest rate environment. If we look at the next page, you'll see the district's existing debt portfolio. So if you do nothing, these are your debt service payments. The top half of the page is gross debt service, meaning principal and interest on your 4 outstanding issues. Your oldest issue, your Series AA of 2015, is about to go away here after the current fiscal year. But you can see in column 6 your gross payments of principal and interest. And more importantly, on the bottom half of the page, you'll see your net share of these payments. So it's basically the top half of the page, principal plus interest minus state reimbursement that you receive to varying degrees. And you can see that state reimbursement near the bottom of the page, that line labeled PE percentage. So you get varying degrees of state reimbursement on all of your issues. So the most important column on this page is column 12. And that's the net effect on your budget each year. So you can see in the current year, you're at about $2.3 million in change. In the upcoming budget year 2023, you get back to your normal running rate. You've had a series of very successful refunding opportunities over the past 3 calendar years. There's a line near the bottom labeled purpose. There we go. And you can see your 2019 issue, your 2020 issue, and your 2021 issue were all refundings. So you've had a very successful refinancing program over the last several calendar years. And so you're enjoying kind of the last of those residual savings in the current year. And in 2023, you get back up to your normal running rate of $2.5 million. What is also very important about column 12, as we think about how to structure potential new borrowings, is that you have a very nice, short, concise debt portfolio. Most Pennsylvania school districts do not have a debt portfolio that completely ends in 2030. So I'll call that 8 years from now, with a substantial drop off after 2029. So you're very well positioned to think about your future capital needs and how to pay for those, how to finance those because of your particular column 12. You know, most Pennsylvania school districts, they don't have significant drop-offs like this in their portfolios till you get out, you know, closer to 20 years or even further. So again, you're very well positioned. The bottom, the line labeled principal, you can see, as I mentioned, you just finished paying off your 2015 AAs. You can see the amount of outstanding principal on your 3 remaining issues, and that totals about $22.1 million there on the far right. As always, I and PFM continue to monitor your debt portfolio for refinancing opportunities, and we monitor by call date. So your next opportunity, interest rates permitting, of course, would be in calendar year 2025, because that call date is March 1 of 2025 on that 2019 issue. So we have a little bit of time before your next refunding opportunity. If we go to the next page under topics, as Dr. Allmore indicated, we're going to look at 5 different scenarios. And really, this is a bit of a sensitivity study, because our first exercise was number 1. It was how much new money could you potentially borrow if you wanted your local share of the payment to remain level at that $2.5 million mark where you currently are. And so we backed into that, and the answer is you could borrow about $36.6 million. And then from there, we incrementally said, if we added $500,000 to that $2.5 million so that your payment was level at $3 million, how much could you borrow? That got us up to $44 million. Likewise, if we made the payment another $500,000 higher at $3.5 million, that gets us up to $51.5 million borrowing. And then what if we increased the annual payment to $4 million? That gets us to $59 million. And finally, what if we increase the annual payment to $4.5 million? That gets us up to $66.6 million. So those are the 5 scenarios that we're going to look at in a minute. And, you know, you could decide as you make decisions on your potential capital improvement program to be anywhere in between there as well. Your current borrowing capacity is about $73.8 million, and that's under the Local Government Unit Debt Act. Your borrowing capacity is calculated, and that's just how much money you could legally borrow. That's the easy part, your legal borrowing limit. The harder part, of course, as you can imagine, is how to pay for that debt service under the constraints of Act 1 and all the other things you have going on in your regular operating budget. The next bullet point, when we talk about the length of a financing of a project, the term or amortization schedule of a project is limited to the useful life of the asset that you're financing. So useful life always comes into play. And if any projects are under Act 39, those are ESCOs or GSAs, that stands for Energy Savings Contract or Guaranteed Energy Savings Agreements. Those types of projects, those are further limited to 20-year financings. They can't go any longer than 20 years. So, as your project progresses, if any part or all become GSA or ESCO related, just please let us know and keep us apprised of that, because it does change the rules a bit that we have to adhere to when we structure potential financings. In this next section, unfortunately, the IRS doesn't let us go borrow money just because interest rates are at historically low levels. The key words in this test are reasonable expectations. And so in order to borrow money at these tax-exempt interest rates, you have to have reasonable expectations that you can spend 85% of the borrowed proceeds within 3 years from settlement. The second prong of the test is you have to have reasonable expectations that within 6 months of settlement, that you expect to incur a substantial binding obligation to spend at least 5% of the proceeds. Doesn't mean you have to have it spent, just means it's a contractual obligation. So usually, that's your architect's contract or your engineer's contract, or if it's a GSA or an ESCO, those particular contracts would all satisfy that. And then the third prong of the test is just that you proceed with due diligence on the capital improvements that you've selected. In this next section, there are different approaches to financing. You can wait until you actually get the construction bids in hand and then borrow the exact right amount. But 9 chances out of 10, if it's a substantial capital improvement program, you use a combination by starting with an advance funding where you borrow a portion of the money prior to receiving your construction bids. And I'll call that seed money to get started with the design and some of the early costs of a project. Then, oftentimes you borrow another portion of the funding after you get the bids in and know exactly how much you need. And then oftentimes you have what's called a cleanup issue where, after you get closer to the end of the project or projects and how your change orders went and your contingency held up, you do the final borrowing so that you ultimately get the sizing exactly right. So that falls into this multiple financing strategy. And that's very, very common. Jersey Shore Area School District has used that many times over the years that I've worked with the district, and it's worked very, very well. The next section, again, is part of the strategy. Bank qualified, those are the lowest possible tax exempt rates that you can get. And that just means that you have expectations of issuing 10 million or less in a given calendar year. And so that not only gets you a lower interest rate, but it also gets you the shortest possible call feature, which that's important for refinancing opportunities such as the ones you've taken advantage of in the past. And then finally on this page, a reimbursement resolution. That's a no harm, no foul resolution. And it just preserves your flexibility and your right that if you do have to advance some of your money for the early costs of a project as you're exploring the project or projects that you might want to undertake, that you can reimburse yourself from borrowed proceeds in the future if or when a borrowing settles. Again, I call that a no harm, no foul resolution because it doesn't obligate you to reimburse yourself. It just preserves the flexibility for you to do so if you so choose. Moving on to the interesting part, the scenarios. So this is scenario 1. And again, this exercise was to see if we kept the payments at $2.5 million, how much could you borrow? So you'll see that this is a 3-step borrowing. The first step would occur in March of 2024, so about 2 years from now. The second step in March of 2025, so separate calendar year. And the final step in March of 2026. And you can see the amounts of each step. So the first step would be 10 million bank qualified. The second step would be greater than 10 million, so it would be non-bank qualified, slightly higher rate. And the third step, again, would be at that $10 million limit to get the bank qualified rates. Again, this is just an example, an analysis. All of this would get customized and tweaked as you make decisions. And, once we ultimately saw what you'd like to do and a draw schedule from the architect, so we could see, roughly when you wanted to do it, we would size this based on your actual plan. So those three steps in this example add up to about $36.6 million out here in column 4. And you can see the project fund that each of them would generate. And you'll see that the project fund, or the part that would be available for bricks and mortar, is about $30,430,000. The difference, or the rest of that 36 million, we're labeling that as capitalized interest for this exercise. And what capitalized interest is, down below, is it's using some of the borrowed money to pay for some of the interest payments during the period of time where the new debt would overlap with the old debt. Because you can see the new debt coming online in columns 7, 8, and 9 gradually. You know, it phases in because each one starts in a different calendar year. So each payment starts on a different school district fiscal year. And you can see when you add the 3 new steps together and add in your old debt in column 6. Remember, column 6 is what you have already, even if you did nothing new. When you add those 4 columns together, you get column 11. So as you look down column 11, you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of overlap where the payments are greater than that $2.5 million that you currently have as your existing running rate in your debt service. And so in column 12, you can see it in terms of mills. And in column 13, you can see how much money you would need in order to smooth it where those overlaps occur, smooth it down and cover it so that your net effect at column 14 is you're still $2.5 million every year. So all capitalized interest means is you're using one-time money to make some of those early interest payments in order to keep your column 14 level at $2.5 million. And then you can see, you know, once we get past the overlap period, once we get past 2029 where your old debt service drops off, then we don't need any more one-time money. We can just structure it at $2.5 million. And you can see that stays at that level through and including 2051. And ultimately, you don't need any new mills. What you did need was about $5.4 million of one-time money in order to pay for that overlap between the old debt and the new debt coming online. Okay? So keep that in the back of your mind as we turn forward to the next page to look at scenario 2. So what happens in scenario 2 is, remember the exercise was, what if instead of the $2.5 million a year payment, what if we want that to be $3 million? So we still have a 3-step plan. You can see the amount of step 2 went up more than scenario 1. You can see this generates a total borrowing of about $44 million out there in column 4. And now you can see this would provide about $38.4 million almost for bricks and mortar of your project. And the capitalized interest, or the one-time money portion of this, goes down compared to the prior option. Now you only need about $4.8 million of one-time money to cover the interest overlap between the old debt and the new debt. And the reason why is, as I scroll down a little bit, you know, again, you still have the same years of overlap, but now in column 15, you start to put, you know, roughly $500,000 in place over the course of 4 different fiscal years. And so that covers and gradually ramps you up to the $3 million level. So you hit $3 million payments in 2028 in this example, and you stay at that $3 million level through and including 2051. So same period of time. But because now you're level at $3 million instead of $2.5 million, you need a total of 2.28 new mills to cover that. And we spread that out over 4 different fiscal years to make that, you know, a gradual phase into your budget. And again, because you're phasing that in, that's why you need a little bit less one-time money or capitalized interest in column 3. Likewise, we went through the exact same exercise in scenario 3. Again, the goal here was to make your running rate $3.5 million instead of $2.5 million. So this allowed for a $51.45 million borrowing. It produced a construction fund deposit for bricks and mortar of about 46.4 million. And now the one-time capitalized interest goes down even further to about $4.17 million. And you can see down below, same overlap period with the old and new debt. Now you can see a gradual phase in column 15 of about 1.14 mils a year, I'll call it. And that's why the one-time money in column 13 is a little bit less, because you're phasing those mills, or it's not even necessarily new mills. Sometimes, depending on the type of project you're doing, sometimes you have indirect cost savings because you're replacing old, inefficient roofs and building systems with new, efficient ones. And sometimes those indirect cost savings can be identified and earmarked to go toward the new debt service, so that it doesn't necessarily mean new mills. If you can identify some of those indirect cost savings, we can build that into the model. So you can see that example, your level at 3.5 million through and including 2051, and that's a total of about 4.5 mils. Again, divided over as many fiscal years as possible. The state law is you have to have millage identified or phased into your budget no later than 2 years after settlement or 1 year after the completion of the project. So again, we'll be able to customize that and fine tune that, you know, if or when, you know, you make project decisions that would provide us more color on some of those details. Scenario 4, same exercise. This gets your running rate up to $4 million a year. It's a $59 million total borrowing program. It produces $54.45 million for construction. Now the one-time capitalized interest is down to about $3.5 million. You can see in column 15, that would mean about 1.7 mils over the course of 4 years, for a total millage equivalent of about 6.83 mils. And again, you're level at about $4 million a year through 2051. So one of the things you could think about if you wanted to do one of these larger scenarios is, you know, potentially not waiting to start identifying mills in 2025. If you could start to set aside some mills in your 23 or 24 budget, it would allow you to spread this out over even more fiscal years and make it even more gradual. And then the last scenario levels your payments at $4.5 million. So that's $2 million more than where they currently reside. That's a $66.6 million borrowing program up there in box 4. You can see that would produce about 62.5 almost million for projects and bricks and mortar. And now the one-time capitalized interest overlap between the old debt and the new debt is about $3 million. And you can see that down below in column 13, smooths you off at $4.5 million in column 14. You can see the millage in column 15. And you're level at that $4.5 million mark again through 2051. And that program is a total of 9.1 mils. Again, and some of that might come from indirect cost savings. Some of that could come from tax increases if you so choose. It's really up to you. These are just really broad, high-level examples, and would certainly need a lot more input from you in order to customize them. And again, you have some time. All of these start in 2024, so you have some time to think about what you'd like to do and when you'd like to do it. But I know that's a ton of information. I will pause there to answer any questions that you have. The last page of my handout, I'm not going to belabor this, but it's just a list of our strategies. And I've used a whole bunch of these strategies to put together the 5 scenarios that we just looked at. But typically these strategies are in the order in which they would be considered. So, you know, first of all is your allowable index increase as limited by Act 1, of course. That increase in the upcoming budget year is 4.7%, which is on the higher end of where these allowable index increases have been. And I think they're projected to be at higher levels for the next couple of years, but the factors that go into this index lag, and therefore, you'll eventually see a decrease in that allowable index increase. So you need to keep that in mind. Interest earnings from the construction fund project, that's been around forever. It hasn't been super exciting because unfortunately investment rates have been also at all-time lows. But certainly once we get that construction draw schedule from the architect, we'll be able to estimate your interest earnings in the construction fund, and we can use those to downsize the amount of money you borrow. The operating savings, I alluded to those a couple times. They can be pretty significant depending on the types of projects you're undertaking. The bank qualified $10 million per year, that can be helpful where it makes sense and where your construction draw schedule and cash flow allows. The wraparound payment structure, that's exactly what I illustrated in all 5 options. That's taking advantage of your very short, concise debt portfolio and those drop-offs in the not too distant future. Those dollars are freed up and can go toward new debt service. And then capitalized interest, that's that one-time money that was illustrated in all 5 examples. So it's really a combination of all of those things that went into the scenarios that you see in this handout. So with that, I will pause, and I would be happy to entertain any questions that you may have at this time.
Thanks so much. A wonderful presentation. I got a couple questions. If we could just look at scenario 2 as an example.
I'm sorry, which scenario?
2.
2.
Well, I guess the first question is, in all the scenarios, obviously we don't know what the rates are going to be in the future, but did you assume a certain rate when you put these scenarios together? And what would that be?
We're assuming an average historic rate because we know we're in a rising interest rate environment.
Right.
Our objective is always to build a plan of finance that is manageable. And then, as always, we would bid out everything that we possibly could. And our goal would be to do better than the scenario that you ultimately select.
So the average you used was?
I'm sorry?
What is the rate? You said that you used an average?
Yeah, it's probably about 4%.
4%, okay.
When you look at bonds, there's a different fixed rate in every single maturity.
Right. So if we tried to look at a scenario where we would perhaps issue the bond this year, we may be able to beat that, possibly.
Yes. Rates are definitely, if you were having any of the sales for any of these steps today, you would definitely do better than this.
Right.
But we're definitely assuming that we're in a higher interest rate environment when we get to 2024, 2025, 2026.
So the 24, 25, and 26, that could be accelerated if we so choose. If we would go out with an issue this year, that would be
Correct.
Change those dates. Are the settlement dates?
That would also accelerate when the payments start, obviously, and it would accelerate, the overlap between the old debt and the new debt.
Right.
So it would either require more capitalized interest or, the identification of mills sooner.
Right.
In your budget.
And the settlement dates, they're the draw dates?
Right. That assumes that's when the money would show up in your construction fund account and be available to pay construction invoices.
So step 1, step 2, and step 3, assuming we would draw in each of those 3 years, those amounts listed.
Right.
And as far as the bank, the $10,000 limit for the bank option, you can't split, like step 2 for scenario 2 is 24 million. You can't take 10 of it. You can't say you use 10 for the bank and the other 14 obviously for
No,
Okay. so-
no, and it'll depend on your project timing and your draw schedule. I mean, if we can make a 4-step plan and carve out another bank qualified borrowing, I mean, we'll do that once we know more about your project.
I
But
see. Okay.
no, the rule is not that the first 10 is bank qualified and anything thereafter is non-bank qualified. You have to have expectations that 10 is all you're going to issue in a calendar year in order to get the lower bank qualified rate to begin with.
Okay. So the fact you have 3 steps, we could in fact have 4?
If your construction draw schedule allows for it,
Gotcha. Okay.
it depends on how long the architect says your projects are going to take.
Okay. Thank you.
Amy,
Absolutely. Great questions. And again, this is just scenarios. Once we get that information, we will customize all of this. But this is just to give you rough ideas of, what debt service could cost on these various amounts.
Jamie, it's Ben. The $10 million bank qualified amount, is that inclusive to any other financing the district would do in that? Is it fiscal year or calendar year? Calendar year, I think you just said.
Calendar year. And yes, so, there's some exceptions. If we were doing a refunding, there's some exceptions. So that only a small portion of a refunding would count. But if you're doing any types of leases and the leasing company, wants to give you a tax exempt rate, and usually how you can tell that is if they try to get you to sign an 8038G form, that's an IRS form. But yes, any tax exempt financings, whether it's, a copier lease or technology lease or bus lease, it counts against that $10 million if it's tax exempt.
So Jamie, for illustrative purposes, if there was a project if there was a smaller project that we wanted to do prior to this scenario that we would want to borrow money for, that would take away from our potential 10 million in that calendar year.
Yes.
Okay.
And just keep me apprised of when you enter into leases, because sometimes the right answer is to do a short-term lease as taxable, which sounds counterintuitive, but if a short-term lease, is a 3 or 5 year lease, sometimes the right answer is to do that short lease taxable and save your good tax exempt rates for your long-term debt. And, I can help you think about that each year as long as you keep me apprised of, any leases or other financings that you might have going on.
Other questions for
Just
Jamie?
for the board's reference, I believe the only time we've really gotten an issue with the lease being counting towards that was when we were doing some iPad leases.
Other questions? Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I do want to say.
Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you. I do want to say before we move on that these were all for illustration purposes. So I hope I don't read in the newspaper tomorrow that we're borrowing that much money. Jamie is simply illustrating for the board where your debt is and where your debt could be based on your current payment and what if you added to that. We haven't committed to that. It's just an illustration. Before we get into internal presentations, I want to call forward Wayne Brookhart and SiteLogic. I also invited tonight Hunt Engineering in the middle of the project, and I did share with the board that they have received bids for our HVAC project, and I did share with the board where the price of those bids were. We've discussed some next steps and scenarios that we talked about. One of the questions that I'm going to open it up to the board, but if you want to give the board a little update, they know most of the information, but go ahead and give them a little update and then we may
Sure.
have some follow-up questions.
Hi, Damian Spar with SiteLogic. So I don't like to make a habit of standing in front of boards and explaining why costs are high, but it seems to be what I do every week in the current construction situation. We've sat in this room and we've talked about things that are happening in the market and where costs were going. And we talked about the Hunt study. And I did speak to Michael a couple of times today. And he sends his apologies that he couldn't be here tonight. But we talked, so he's aware of exactly what we're going to talk about tonight from our end anyway. So I went back and I looked at it and I said, understanding that when Hunt walked through the building and looked around and did the cursory look that you do when you do a study, they could only see so much. And we do the same things. So I can tell you Hunt did a decent job with that, but it was done, I think, about 3 years ago, prior to COVID and quite a while ago. Since then, we've found out things that under a scenario where we're not compressed doing design and pricing, which is what we've done here. We've gone from getting a design done, and while we're doing that, pricing equipment so we could even get it, to really pricing it right away. Usually you have a concept, you say, study this concept, you do a schematic design, and you start to see what's behind everything before you get to pricing. So in the expeditious world that we all have lived in with this project, we went right to pricing, which skipped right over there's this issue, there's that issue, and here the scope is a little bit different and should be done, and you get to a price. So what that is, importantly, is Hunt did, in my estimation, a real good job of trying to figure out what to do up front. We specified units, for example, on the roof that would be replaced exactly the way they were. But we can't get those units because they're not available. So instead of being able to replace them the way they were, we have to replace steel and change steel around in the roof curbs and add costs to those units. The idea was great. The original cost thought on how to do it was great, but we couldn't actually make that happen in real life because those units weren't available from the manufacturer. There was another instance, for example, where the lobby at the high school, there was one unit that wasn't in the study to be replaced, and we all looked at that with Hunt and said, well, that really should be replaced with that. So that was scope that actually got added in. And when I started to look at all this and say, where would we have been if we would have added the scope in and some of the things behind the walls and how we were going to have to route piping, et cetera, the scope and the normal inflation that we saw before COVID would have had us up quite a bit. Not up as high as we are. The rest of up as high as we are is because I've seen over the last 3 months, 15% inflationary costs in 3 months in certain trades. And a lot of those trades are electrically and mechanically, where the pricing of commodities is driving these things. I have school districts that are putting off paving, and I think we conferred with the superintendent a little bit about paving. That's a situation where prices are going way up with oil, but a situation where oil can come down, like wood can come down. And sometimes when those things come down, waiting it out is the right thing to do. When it comes to labor, our labor's not going down, but it hasn't gone up at the rate of material and everything else. So we've basically gotten ourselves to a place where I've gone back and even gotten other contractors to bid more just to try and drive pricing down. We've got a set of good contractors that are ready to go and do the work, but the pricing is up higher than we want it to be. And it's up higher than what we originally expected, on top of adding some scope to do the project really well. The one thing that Ms. Doyle said, she talked about operational savings. This project over the 20-year period does have about a $380,000 operational savings over that time frame. And that's because you've gotten efficiency in equipment, even though you're adding some cooling loading with some of the cooling that you're adding to the building in different places. So I think with all that said, I'd be happy to listen to what you're thinking about and engage in that.
I'll be honest, one of the concerns that we are all sharing as a board is we talked about a potential rebid, but at this point in the year, we're concerned about being able to pull it off still this summer. And knowing that we have grant money in hand, we don't want to be in a situation where we rebid, we don't get a successful rebid, and we've lost our opportunity to move forward.
I actually took it upon myself to rebid the mechanical piece, the biggest piece, to somebody that I trust a lot, and they're actually the low bidder right now, because I wanted to make sure that I got as good a number as I could. So I'm getting what the market's bearing with companies that I trust. It's just unfortunate that between some of the things that we knew to put in the project to make them what the project needed to be, and the costs and the constraints, it is driving these numbers up. I have asked the contractors to hold tight, knowing that your next decision point would be April 11th, and they're willing to do that. The other thing that we get the benefit of here is that we don't have the change order situation, because this is a design build project. Even though the project was designed by Hunt, we kind of own the responsibility for, we're not going to be standing here saying, well, this wasn't in Hunt's documents and we needed to make it work. No, we own that. We've had to make sure we caught all that stuff. So the back end of this is, I'm not standing up here talking about change orders, but the front end of this is, we have to discuss how to go forward, knowing that we've got the right scope in the project, good contractors willing to get it done. And you're correct that doing it again is going to push it out into time. And every month there are price increases for these folks. And it's murder to have to continue to experience this for my clients. And these are just difficult discussions to have.
Questions from the board?
Can you give us a flavor for how much, or percentage, I guess, the scope piece affected the final?
I think that the scope piece was probably at least a third of it, a pretty big chunk. Between the units that we couldn't replace in kind and we had to make modifications to, the things that weren't readily seen in a brief walkthrough by Hunt, and that's appropriate at that level. And the one issue of adding that lobby unit and that work in that area, which is kind of the only work that wouldn't have been redone in that area, adding that to it is probably about a third of that increase. The other things that I've found in my conversations and in my experiences is this is a project that's kind of surgical. I do better with numbers when I have projects that are a long period of time and that have some economy of scale. There's not a lot of economy of scale here. It's surgical in different places. And summertime construction has a higher premium on it right now than it has had in the past because of everything going on in the market.
Thank you.
I think Jamie is still with us. Jamie, I guess one of my questions would be for you, if you're still hearing us. If we needed to move forward with a smaller borrowing to pull this rest of this project off, what would a turnaround time look like for you?
From the time you say go, this is how much we'd like to borrow, it's about 60 to 90 days until everything's done and the money shows up in your construction fund deposit.
Okay.
A big part of that is the credit rating. Once we get the documents in order, the credit rating agency takes at least 3 weeks to do their review. And then another big part of it is DCD approval. They get up to 20 days to approve the borrowing before you can settle. So those are kind of the two longest parts of the process.
Does this give us enough time?
I believe it would, given, and I forget, Dr. Ulmer, exactly what the number of ESSER dollars is that you had to contribute.
We have 2 million in grant funds to contribute. So we have spent about 1.1 of that on equipment.
Yeah. So I think that what we would do is we would manage to that number. If, for example, you wanted to borrow the whole thing, we would manage to the ESSER funds that you have and make sure that our draws were back-ended. If you think about it and you say, take April off the plate and say May, June, and into July, when you'd be having this project is going to go and be built through the summer and into the fall because we're going to be starting up boilers and things like that. So we're going to have August, September, October billings to space out what I think a lot of that difference would be. And we would work with you on that if that was something that the district wanted.
And Jamie, just to verify then, if we borrowed this piece of money that we need with the ESSER funds, if we decided we needed to borrow more for another project, that would cut into like that 10 million that you had put in that first column as step one, correct?
Not unless.
Well,
was in
it
the
would
same
cut into
year.
your 10 million for calendar year 2022 if you're talking about borrowing now. That first column in all of my illustrations wasn't until calendar year 2024.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Damien? So I guess I'm asking for direction. I heard him say that we could still award the bids on April 11th. We do have a 10-day notification window, so we have time to provide adequate notification to award bids on April 11th to move forward with them, knowing that then we would have to go back to Jamie and finance what you don't have in grant funds.
Well, we also have, I mean,
Right.
there's other funding, i.e. our capital project fund, as an example. We could take some of that. So I think we have some options to get the best bang for our buck. And I'm concerned about taking advantage of the low interest rates and looking beyond $1 million at this point. So I think we need to look at the big picture and see what we can do with what we want to do for the next number of projects. And so I don't think we'll have a problem financing the project at this point, is what I'm saying.
And if you elect to go ahead and make notice, you can make the decision later or take that time. The notice probably should go out tomorrow just to make sure you're in. In the meantime, if you want to continue this the way we're talking about, however it's financed, I'm going back to everybody on my team and continuing to knock down whatever I can find. I will also tell you, if I can find something that we don't need, like I'll make something up. If we don't need to redo steel in one of those because somehow we opened it up and it all works, I'm not promising that because I don't think it's going to be true, but there can be things that happen that way. I'll bring you credit for whatever I don't need at the end of the job. I don't want it if I don't need it, but I am going to continue to try and work that number down. I'm getting to de minimis amounts of $10,000 chunks or something like that. Not something huge, but dollars are dollars. So I'm going to continue that effort as I've done. And we'll work with Hunt to do that too.
I'm concerned about the rising costs at this point. I say we go forward. I don't know that we have a choice.
Well, you don't have time because you have to give 10 days notice. So you really can't move forward before the 11th because we
That's
have to
okay.
publicize it for 10 days.
Yeah, the 11th is fine. And that's the benefit of having good subcontractors that we know and, they understand what you're up against so that they're aware of the timing. And I'm not finished with them yet, but we'll see how I do.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you. Thank you.
Mrs. Henry, an athletic budget presentation. We're going to start with you and then we'll move to Mr. Wall.
I'm not sure after that if I really want to do this or not.
You're fine.
You guys need this? Are you putting this up somewhere?
On.
Like, did I forget to send it to somebody? Oh, gosh. Probably not.
While she is pulling that up, both of these presentation documents are at your seat and include the presentation copy and the pieces of the budget book for each of these departments are both at your seat.
Yeah, what you have is not all mine. So, I am Serena Henry, your athletic director, and this is my budget requests for next year. Review of what we've done this year. So, and moving into next year. This season, for this school year, I have done monthly coaches meetings, which I feel have been working really, really well. So I'm working on continuing them for next year. Start working on building my culture within my teams, with my coaches, so they can spread it through the teams and it moves forward. So far it seems successful. We just want to continue working on that for next year. Second thing on my list here is an athletic leadership seminar. When I went to national conference, a couple schools have been doing this and it's really neat. Take like 2 students from every grade level of every team, take them off campus for the day and just pump them full of all kinds of motivation, leadership skills, all kinds of speakers and everything, and just do that. I would like to try and work on doing that for next year, building some more of that culture, now spreading it out into our student athlete leaders. As usual, I have equipment that I'm trying to update and upgrade. Some of our facilities could use not just the facilities in the big general sense of it, but the little pieces of equipment that we use. A lot of it is outdated, worn, and you'll see that when I do my line items here, that a lot of things, most of my replacement is just because it's outdated and worn from use over years. Continue to expand our Bulldog Nation. At the high school, I have pool banners in the parking lot, just promoting our who we are. When somebody walks onto one of our campuses, my goal is that they know who we are. We start that intimidation as soon as they walk onto campus. Though our colors are orange and black, and they know we are the Bulldogs. So expand my Bulldog Nation from the high school into the middle school and across to all our campuses. And next item is our athletic trainer. Last year's budget, you might remember, we added a part-time trainer with UPMC. They were unable to fulfill that contract with us this past year. We're still interested in continuing that for the next school year. And they are working on interviewing graduates. So they're anticipating filling, they had multiple, over their surface area, they had multiple athletic trainers that they were unable to fill, that they were constantly bringing in subs and not filling a full-time position. And since our position was a part-time position, we were kind of at the bottom of the list. So it looks more positive to bring in another athletic trainer for next season because they are jumping ahead. They're interviewing graduates coming out of school, looking for those jobs now for May, starting summer sessions. So any questions on where I'm headed? Couple state championships in there too.
How has the fact that they've not been able to supply assistance, is that had a negative effect on anything?
No, we've just pretty much, our athletic trainers pretty much just run as normal, and as we have in the past. My biggest concern is when we have multiple events and we only have one.
If you remember a year ago when we had this conversation, the concern was if there's 2 events happening at the same time, we don't have coverage in both places. So that's the reason we put that in the budget for that. Half, the part-time person would be coming in to fill in when we had 2 events happening at the same time, and not worrying that we have the trainer somewhere, but what if something happens in the other location? One of the things you'll see on the budget tonight is we're pushing that money tonight, if it's approved, into a replacement that she needs, rather than rolling that into next year's budget, so that we're not getting ourselves behind.
Mean that we're not gonna have money to. The fact that we have 2 sporting events going on at the same time, we still only have a trainer
Currently.
currently, but next, we're gonna have another one in the fall.
Yeah, what we're hearing from UPMC is they're currently interviewing. The problem we ran into is they had full-time positions that they couldn't fill, so they weren't filling our part-time until they filled their full-time, because that meant if they would have filled our part-time instead of a full-time opening, there would have been a district that had none. So it was prioritized to wait on our part-time until they could fill their full-time. So in the fall, the goal is if that part-time's filled, both events would be covered if 2 were happening at the same time.
We pay these people, right?
But we're not paying them anything right now. We're only paying if we're using the service.
Yes.
That's what I
Yep.
was.
Yep.
Yep. And he'll be sending us a new contract for this coming school year. All right. Where's my money going? Soccer goals. Our game goals at the soccer field are in really bad shape. Mark's guys have done wonders of trying to piece them back together. So, I'm like, Mark, if you can just give me an extra year, I don't have them on this budget, but we can put them on the next one. So here it is. I need soccer goals in the fall. That's a pretty big item. That's about $12,000 to get us 2 new ones. My intention is to look for another set of portable goals, so they're not permanent the way the ones are right now. So that'll give us 2 sets of movable goals to make them more flexible for us for when they want to move them for practices and stuff. That it just, if something happens like the field did the one season, the goals can be moved easily rather than all the effort that it took into moving the old ones. Next line item here would be lane lines for the swimming pool, a new set of lane lines and a new reel. This runs about $4,000, $4,000 to $5,000 between the 2 items together. So that would be 5 new lane lines and the reel to store them on. Basketball side court backboards. Currently, some of the other teams make fun of the ones that we still have there because they could be archived and antiqued. But to replace some of those, just so that when the kids are practicing, they're actually practicing on the same type of backboard that they have on the main courts, rather than improvising with what we actually have up there now. So I have budgeted for the 8 sideline courts to be replaced, similar to the exact same thing that's on the main courts for basketball play. Right now we have the moon-shaped backboards, metal backboards that just, they don't give you the same training effect as the sidelines do, or as the main ones do. And my continuous effort to upgrade uniforms. So this past season, we did new football jerseys, new track uniforms, which I'm waiting any day to get back in. We have nice new orange track uniforms. Let's see, we did middle school boys basketball, and somebody else I can't think right now. So next on the list would be middle school track. Now that we have the varsity track done, do the middle school track, do girls soccer, get a stock of golf polos for the golf team, middle school girls basketball, and the middle school football jerseys. Those are my big items of cost for the next school budget.
Serena, before you go on the back courts, what was the approximate cost without me looking for everything?
They're about 900 a piece.
You said you were doing 8 of them?
Yep.
Okay.
I have a question also, Mrs. Henry. With regard to golf, we had that sport start last year,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So if we had 0 in the budget, where did that funding come from prior?
Well, last year we manipulated some, I guess manipulated isn't the right word, but we moved things to balance those out. But the polo shirts were donated by the coach. And any of the startup equipment, he helped donate to get the kids started so that they could get things up and rolling. So then I just added that now into my budget for this year. So you'll see that there is nothing budgeted, but there's now a whole bunch of new line items for staff and for transportation.
Serena, do you remember which uniforms we replaced this year?
We got the new orange football jerseys, 200 track uniforms, boys basketball at the junior high level. So it was 9th, 7th, and 8th grade teams. Then I think there was another one in there.
Boys soccer potentially? Or was that the year
Oh, I
before?
wish, but no, they're newer
They're
than,
coming, okay.
they're newer than old.
I know one of the concerns that we had about golf was transportation last year and the budget for transporting them, but you'll notice in her line by line on the next slide that she took a deeper look at transportation and what she's been spending and did lower that because we were confident that it's lower based on what we've consumed this year, but that's also a dangerous territory because that could also go up.
So yes, that's the bottom line on the next slide here. So that includes all my transportation, any tournament fees, equipment, staff, uniforms, and that uniform with the new polo for the team. So that uniform now becomes school district property. They sign it in, sign it out the same way of any of our other sports do then also. Yes.
What is the rotation for uniforms?
It's about every 6 years. Yes. And so what I have done is I do a varsity sport, like we've done track this year, and now next year do the middle school. So I did boys basketball, boys varsity basketball, girls varsity basketball. Then this past year it was boys middle school program. So that's the next step would be the girls middle school program.
Regular schedule that you follow.
Yep. Yep.
I have a question. When the band uniforms were up and we needed to purchase them, how much of that money came from the boosters?
I believe they offered to split it in half. Okay, so maybe it wasn't half.
Do the sports not have boosters like that? Like that? I don't know.
There are. She's asking what.
They have like boys baseball this past season wanted to purchase a second uniform. So the booster club purchased a whole away uniform, which is a black and white uniform. So looking at an equivalent for softball is either picked up by the boosters or would be picked up by us, but they have a second uniform that they use for pink outs rather than it's not an away uniform, so that now both teams literally have two sets of uniforms. So it's things like that that the boosters pick up, but the actual, I would say, primary uniform, we've covered the cost for that.
Is that policy? Like, is,
More or less past practice. There is not a policy one way or the other.
I'm afraid that some of our teams just wouldn't have the money to balance it. And in a situation like boys basketball, girls basketball, I'm just using that as an example, but giving you that equality, that some teams have more money than other teams. Oh, cheerleading was the other one. We got new cheerleading uniforms. So that was the last one for this past season.
Serena, I have a question.
Yes.
For the girls' soccer uniforms, does that include the goalies? Because
Yes.
it's different.
Yes, we would
Okay.
buy, that would be include the,
Isn't that more expensive than a regular uniform? Because that's gloves and I believe like knee pads and.
the boosters usually pick up the glove and the knee
Okay.
pads. We usually just get the clothing apparel side of it.
Okay.
how many uniforms on average are you purchasing for each sport?
Really depends. Because like the varsity soccer, or the varsity track team, that was 200 uniforms, 100 boys, 100 girls. But for the soccer team, it could be 40.
How many of those, out of the 100 for the boys, like how many of them are in use per season?
Right now, we have an average 40 to 50. Then that can also push that longevity of it also. So it might not be a 6-year rotation. It could be pushed to 8 to 10 years, depending on how that is used. Ready to move on? All right, this is just where you'll see these line items. So I pretty much covered most of it, but in basketball, under my 610, it's the updated sideline backboards and the girls' uniforms, which is about a $10,000 increase from last year. And that's mostly the backboards for the sidelines. Football middle school jerseys, it's just the progression. We've already gone through the varsity jerseys, the varsity pants and stuff. Now we're replacing the middle school equipment now to get them. I walked out on their practice field and it's like, whoa, guys, you need new jerseys. So, girls soccer uniforms need replaced with, their old uniforms still have the numbers, the iron-on numbers, the vinyl numbers on their uniforms. And now today's uniforms, they're sewn literally into the materials. So parents don't have to worry about them peeling off. That also adds a longevity to them, that they're part of the material, dyed materials. So that would be replacing theirs, because theirs are the ones that are in worse shape than everybody else's. So these are all increases, mostly a couple decreases here, but they're mostly increases. The swimming lane lines is a big chunk for replacing the 5 lines in the reel. Track would be the middle school uniforms, now that we have the varsity uniforms, move on to the middle school level. Wrestling, theirs is training equipment. They have couple pieces that they would like that's more individualized training equipment. Like the one piece was, it mounts on the wall and it's like this big puffed up dummy with legs and arms that mounts on the wall, and they wrestle with it. But and that was, looking at that, it's cheaper to buy the 2-piece set than it is to spend the money 1 year and buy one piece and spend the money another year to buy the second piece. So you buy the 2-piece set, one goes in the varsity locker or down in the mat room, the other one goes in the middle school mat room. So that was pretty much a couple different training tools for them, was pretty much their increase in expenses. Down to cheerleading. Last year, we purchased uniforms, and so taking that out of their budget, but keeping a couple of spirit items that would pretty much be like, hey, this is what we have in the budget to spend, and confer with the new coach when that does happen, of like, here's some money for some spirit items just to increase our Bulldog Nation. So that's a decrease from what we did have because we're not purchasing uniforms this year. Now, transportation. I was so excited. I reduced it by almost $12,000. And then now we are here today. So in October, it looked really good. So if I could try and travel back to October, I've taken a closer look at what transportation is actually costing us and figuring how many away games we have, how many home games we have, what we do for tournaments. And I was able to get a closer look on that and evaluate that a little bit better and pull that out of there. So that at one point did look really good. I can't tell you what it's going to look like. So. Replacement of the soccer goals, high end of up to $12,000 for that upgrade of equipment. And like I said, they're just hanging on because Mark's guys have fixed them multiple times. And then the startups of getting the actual line items of the golf team on the budget and continuing from there.
Mrs. Henry, I have a question related to cheer. Can you give me an example of what a spirit item is?
Okay, so you'll see at football games, they have the big flag that the cheerleaders hold that the football team bursts through at the football games. That is, actually that thing's like $1,500. So it's just, and that would be like it's something they could use, and it's, you know, it's part of the cheer programs for almost every program, but it would have to be something that, you know, it would be the decision. It's there to be purchased, but up to the new cheer coach if you see a reason to use it and want to use it for that. We replaced some megaphones last season. Yes, last season I got some new megaphones for the season, and I actually had one of the teachers at the high school did decals for us on them to make them. They're just the plain black ones, but we dolled them up and they look like bulldogs now. So that's what I mean when I'm like spirit items of just it's
Something beyond their uniforms that they would use for their program.
Yep.
Whether it be signs that they would hold during cheers or a banner.
Or even just around the stadiums, or items just to promote that the cheerleaders can.
Other questions?
I have a question. I don't know if this is budget related though. The mascot, do we still use the mascot? I've been to the football games, and that's not something I saw. The other teams had theirs.
It's usually someone who wants to.
We don't have anybody who wants to.
We had someone who wanted to at the beginning of the season, and then wanted, because you can't cheer when you're in the mascot.
Mm-hmm.
You just pretty much just walk around. So the young lady wanted to cheer, so she learned the cheers and then moved into the cheerleading slot rather than doing the mascot. So yes, we actually have 2 of them. So
But nobody uses them.
they're right now sitting in storage waiting to be used. So yeah, it's just getting someone like, oh yeah, I want to be the mascot. It's fine because you can go out there and act real crazy and nobody knows who you are.
Right. Right. Thanks.
So Serena, overall, if I did my math correctly, you're looking at a $40,000 increase
I think
from
that's
last
about
year.
where I was when I looked at it.
That kind of makes me nauseous.
Well, if you look at like the backwards, she's not buying them every year. She's not buying them every 10 years, probably. That's a pretty
Yeah,
much
like
a
the
one-time,
soccer
that's pretty much
goals
a
and the-
one-time purchase, which went up 10,000 right there.
But we're asking our principals to cut everything bare bones. And we're looking at a $40,000 increase. Like, is there anything on here that can be pushed back another year or maybe two? Like, this, that's a lot of money.
We, I would ask not to remove the, soccer goals. But we've been working with the lane lines. We end up fixing them every season. So they should be replaced, but
Do you know how old they are?
they, 15,
15 years.
yes, yes. Or no, sorry, 2015.
Okay.
6
Is-
years.
Is there any chance of possibly bringing the uniform costs? One of the examples that was mentioned is that we're ordering 100, but using 50 to 60 at one time, kind of to lengthen that. But is there any room that we could, I mean, we're not using them all.
I can look into reducing, so my purchase of 100 middle school track uniforms, I could probably reduce to 80 and see if it really makes a difference in the cost and take a closer look at that. What was the other thing on there I was looking at? The backboards, I could probably break up into 2 years and split the cost, do the high school 1 year, do the middle school the next year. Like I kind of like to do with the uniforms.
Dr. Elmer, are we any closer to figuring out the advertising piece with the cameras
Well, we
that are
have,
being installed?
we have on tonight on the agenda for us to talk about the policy that I drafted that would allow for that. But again, it's the only for presentation for tonight. We would have to get through the 2 reads of that policy before we could even approve the list of what it would look like to be able to start generating money.
And we won't, at this point, we won't show athletic events on there till fall. I want to try and hopefully get them up for graduation. Either graduation at the gym or the stadium. Any other questions?
I would like to see this formatted differently. All the other presentations show the most recent year actual. And athletics, I think, is the only one that doesn't. I would also like to have subtotals for each sport after the personnel section, which would be obviously salaries and benefits. And then a subtotal for other expenditures and then a grand total. Because all the salaries, all the budgeted salaries are flat. So we're actually looking at not only a pretty sizable increase in all other expenses, but the percentage, I'm guessing, could be upwards of 10%. And I don't know that we can, I don't think we're in a position to be able to afford a 10% increase in athletics for non-personnel items. But I think if we can recast this the actual columns to include 2021 actual and subtotals for each of the sports between personnel line items and non-personnel, I think that would give us a little better flavor to see what things look like and make a better determination whether we need to make some cuts. right now, the grand total is almost 5%. But like I say, if you remove all the salaries, which are flat, sure it's gonna be much higher.
I'm assuming that's, Ben, you're gonna put that together.
And we can, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but we'll have to look at when we can pattern this coming back after the other budget presentations that we have scheduled. I think we would have time in May. I have to look at my calendar. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Wall.
At the first boardroom or the second boardroom? Didn't give me a code.
His comes with music.
Good evening.
Yeah, walk-up music.
All right, so what do you have in front of you? I broke these down by function, by building. Start off with the district office administration building. What I put on this PowerPoint was basically, there's no decreases that I delivered to you, it's all increases.
So, thanks a lot.
You'll see this multiple times throughout all the other buildings, disposal services, that's all went up. Landfill fees are up, I think 8 to 10%. We just got a notification on that. Fire extinguisher service, what that is basically a contractor we have come in once a year to service all our fire extinguishers throughout the building. There's a small increase there. Fire device annual inspections, you'll see that throughout the other buildings as well. That's the annual service we have done to all the life safety devices in the buildings. Fire alarms, smoke alarms, CO2 detectors, all them kinds of things. And then on this one, the 430 for tractor repairs, equipment repairs for this building is an increase of $200. So from last year to this year, there's a $6,000 decrease, $6,623. Move on to athletics. Athletics, just tracking our bills from last year to this year, looks like the water could go up potentially $50. Something new that wasn't on last year's budget at the Thompson Street Stadium, there's 11 trees as soon as you walk in from the Thompson Street side that are on the bank there. That there's 3 of them that are dead and the rest of them are just trees that could be cut down and not there. They're just a messy tree. I hate to see the wind blow them down on our property or the adjacent property. That was a quote I got, in November. I think it'll be good. That was at $8,000. And then, this year I didn't put money in last year for the Jersey Shore Borough softball field, infield mix, projected cost on that. We need to keep adding to that field every year to keep it in good shape. That's an increase or a projected cost of $3,000. So there's a total increase of $3,050 for athletics. Avis Elementary emergency generator, that's projected cost from the vendor that does the emergency generator propane, I'm sorry. The cost of propane, that a $50 increase for that. Again, fire alarm inspection, looking at that's a service agreement quote I got from them. It's a $30 increase. HVAC repair, I added $100 to that just for an increase of services. HVAC supplies, that would be motors, pumps, anything of that nature for HVAC equipment. I've added $200 to that. Unit vent filters, you'll see that in every building as well. All that stuff has gone up a little bit. But all in all, Avis, there's a $900 decrease. District-wide, maintenance work order system, that's a contracted cost. That's a $126 increase. I increased the vehicle fleet maintenance and repairs, a $2,000 increase. HVAC system control contract, that's for our HVAC controls. There's an increase of $796 in the contract. Annual district-wide emergency generator repair service, that's a contracted amount as well, of a $99 increase for district-wide. That's every school. HVAC service, I increased that by $3,000. Chiller compressor service, that 3 or 4 of our buildings have chillers that require service every year, and I can see that going up as well. Employee uniforms, that was strictly what our employees are contracted for uniforms in their AFSCME agreement. So that comes out to what it is. The last thing on this list for district-wide would be a commercial mower. We're looking to not replace one of our other mowers, but purchase a mower that we could make some time with. We're pretty short-staffed around the district in a whole. I think I'm looking at purchasing a mower possibly 17, 18 miles an hour versus 8 miles an hour. So we could make a lot of time with that. I put $17,000 in there for that, and that's solely because I could not get a firm quote for July 1. They can't promise anything right now as far as what something like that would cost. It could be $12,000, but when I talked to a couple of vendors, I think we would be comfortable keeping that in there just to be safe and not go back and say, it's put 14 in there and it comes back at 17,000. So district-wide for this year's a $57,000, $229 decrease. Jersey Shore Elementary, again, disposal service. Fire extinguisher service. This building, Jersey Shore Elementary, has sprinkler inspections. That's a service agreement quote that went up $265. This building also has an elevator that agreement has went up as well. And then rooftop unit filters. The reason you'll see rooftop unit filters for Jersey Shore Elementary is there are no unit vents at Jersey Shore Elementary as compared to the other schools. move on to maintenance. No additions to maintenance this year. There's a $6,500 increase. I don't know if you could remember, we replaced 2 garage doors at our maintenance shop last year. That was a $6,500. Middle school. Again, fire alarm inspection, sprinkler inspections, all a $69 to $65 increase. Gym bleacher repairs. We ran into some issues this year with bleacher repairs that weren't as prepared for as we could have been. A lot of our bleachers are fairly old. The motors and rollers, the automatic rollers that run the bleachers out are getting to be in worse shape than, and they've really gone up in cost. I can remember when they were $400. Now they're $800 just for a single motor for that. And then HVAC supplies for middle school, I increased that by $100. Saladaysburg Elementary. Treatment plant lab fees, that's the vendor we use. That's the increase that we can see with them. Disposal fees, again, I think it's pretty much typical the whole way down for each building. It's senior high. Elevator maintenance, that's a contracted quote that went up as well. Pool lab fees, our same lab fees for our treatment plant, our swimming pool gets sent to the same entity. HVAC supplies, the $200 increase. And natural gas, I'm just following our natural gas bills. I think maybe we have some work to do on those numbers because I think things might change with our vendor that supplies our gas. But that's where that is at for now. The high school, there's a $5,175 increase. Some of the contributing factors that aren't in this year's budget that were in last year's budget. In the 430s, we had all our roof maintenance agreements, which that would have been last year. We'll skip a year this year and we'll go back. You'll see those in the next year's budget. That was about a $10,000 bill. The irrigation equipment that was purchased for the soccer field, that was another $8,000 that you won't see in this budget as it was a one-time purchase. And then there was about the replacement of that 1998 International maintenance vehicle that we have. That $90,000 was in last year's budget that will not be in this year's budget, obviously. And the 2 garage doors that I've already mentioned, that totals $115,000 just with those main things that you won't see in this year's budget. So the total budget as a whole right now, as it sits, there's a decrease of $69,416. So it's 1.348904 is the total budget for right now. I'll take any questions you might have.
Mark, did you ever get the truck?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. We ran into kind of the same scenario with the last truck. We worked out a contract with the dealer that we pay it in the same budget year, we pay them and then they just deliver the vehicle. They still haven't gave me a date because I'm working on permit fees for the landfill because that truck is one of the trucks we have permitted through the landfill. And I just called them to basically ask them, should I buy permits for this truck or the truck you're selling me? And they said I would buy them for the truck that you have right now just to be safe. So I think the guys did well this winter with the truck that we had. We made it just about through, well, it still is winter, but we made it through. We made it through winter with one truck. We got the other new salt truck about, I think it was around 3 weeks ago. So we made it through winter. We have the other new truck. Feel pretty good about that. But then, yeah, there's a lot of other things that go with the other new truck. There's a CDL requirement that the new truck won't require. It's another thing that we won't have to pay anymore. But, yeah. I don't have a date when we'll have it.
Thank you. Didn't the state pass a thing where if you plow, you don't need a CDL?
I think that, no, I don't believe so. I mean, anywhere that it goes by the weight of the truck, which an air-operated truck with an air-operated brakes, you would need to have a CDL.
Right.
I mean, if I took that truck to, say, the senior high and parked it, and somebody was trained to drive it, yeah, but you couldn't legally drive it.
I don't mean driving it, but I mean plowing though. I thought they did something.
Well, you'd
that-
have to get from where all our guys are at in the morning, they park the trucks there overnight, every night. And then they drive that truck from Salisbury, Senior High, Avis, wherever they need to go with it. So they couldn't legally drive on a state road
Oh, because it's
without a
state road,
CDL
it's
license.
property. It's school district. It's not like townships or.
Yeah, I don't know about that changing as far as driving it.
Recent. It's really recent.
I would check on that, but
I'll check on it.
Other questions for Mr. Wall?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Keen is back with us tonight. He did present the audit information to you about the 339 audit. But one of the follow-ups to that audit is there is a report that has to be filed as our district response. So he's going to review that with you tonight briefly. Double check my memory. They will have to approve this before we send it to the state.
Yes, but the state wants to look at it first,
Okay.
make sure it's good. They'll send it back to me. I'll send it to you and stamp and move on.
So once we hear back initially that what he has proposed as a response is acceptable, then you can approve it as our official response and send it in. Mr. King.
All righty, let me get this up and running, and I want to keep it short and sweet. All of you received basically the correction list that I sent to Dr. Almer. And when you first looked at it, you probably, like me, almost passed out, fell over. It's like, what is going on? But then I did a little bit of digging into it to find out exactly what was going on. So we followed the rubric that the state gave us for this audit. We followed it fairly well. For the most part, we had a few hiccups. Some of the technology issues we had caused some problems. We had, obviously, COVID caused some issues, those sort of things. But the biggest item we found was the evaluation rubric that they had did not match the project rubric that they gave us. And it took me a little while to track it down, but I found this checklist, they called it. So I have it now, and it'll be taken care of pretty quickly. So for this presentation, I went through all the items that they cited, and I separated it in two different areas. One, checklist items, and the other, which I kind of told Dr. Almer today, the real items, the overall program items that we need to look at. So on the left-hand side, just real quick, there's quite a few checklist items, and it's an Occupational Advisory Committee checklist. Basically, they were looking for an actual form that they have that the advisory committee needs to go through and mark on, kind of like a rubric of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, if they met these different things. So does the Occupational Advisory Committee approve the materials that the program's using, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? They were looking specifically for that form. I had no idea this form even existed until this audit. So I talked to a number of other directors who had the response was, what checklist form? So it's a state audit. I'll give you another, for instance, 2.1 letters of support. We had letters of support in our bins, our electronic bins, but they weren't on letterhead. They weren't on letterhead, they didn't count. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. You'll notice I have OAC checklist on pretty much everything on the left-hand side. That means that'll be dealt with at our next advisory committee meeting for all the programs. It'll be done. Okay, so we'll have the checklist. They'll go through them, all taken care of. OAC minutes from the 2019-20 school year, we need to have 2 meetings a year. Obviously, you know what happened in 2020. The bigger items are on the right-hand side are the overall program items that we do need to look at some of these things. 3.1, 2 of these items I think are a concern for me. The CTE extension credit. This is something they want students to have credit for anytime they're working with the teacher. So right now we have them in our shore period. It's a 30-minute period. All of the program students are with their program teacher. They act as a mentor. They help them through personal projects, continue projects, so forth and so on. We used to be able to count that time. As long as the time was with the program teacher and they were together, it counted. Not now. It needs to be credited time now. So one thing we may need to do is look at, and actually Dr. Armour had a good idea with this with his ag program for Milton, was looking at providing what's called an extension credit, like a CTE extension credit for that shore period in order to keep the shore period in place. Without that, we're going to have to completely restructure our bell schedule, which means we'll probably lose shore in order to meet the minutes requirements for the CTE programs. Because we need 27 credits to graduate, it's really, really tight. So I have to have so many periods in a day to meet it, which means the minutes per period are smaller. So it gets to be complicated. This would fix it. So it's something I'm going to be coming to you with, and I put half a credit just as a, for instance. That doesn't mean that's exactly what it needs to be. It could be quarter credit, 11th grade, and quarter credit, 12th grade. But a lot of these students do stuff outside of school. This extension provides credit for those work-based learning experiences that they gain. So I know where the state's going with it. I think it's a good idea. Basically giving students credit for things that they're doing beyond the scope of the school that's related to the program and the skills that they're learning. So I wish I would have known a little more about it, but the articulation agreement for our tech ed program was out of date. They would like to have that updated. There wasn't anything I saw wrong with it. They just want it refreshed and updated. So we're already working on that. 8.1, the big one, kind of the elephant in the room is the Skills USA program. This was the issue we had a few years ago with our audit. We have to have a Skills USA program. That's a club. That's a teacher-run organization. And I can only have a Skills USA program if I have a teacher that runs it. So that's why we haven't had it from the last review. I haven't had a teacher step up for that yet. We have no choice at this point in time. Without this, we're going to have none of our programs will be approved. So this is kind of a big deal. So one of them need to step up and do this. The other 2 big items are the student records. They would like the career objective forms to be in the individual student records. I keep the career objective forms every year in a folder in my filing cabinet. When they asked, I handed them the folder. They want them in the student records. Okay, we'll file them in student records. Be done, no problem. The other one is the NOCTI scores. They want the NOCTI scores listed on their transcripts, like the Keystone scores. I think it's a good idea, but I'm not sure it needs to be on this, but I think it's a good idea. So that's kind of where we're at. There are, a couple big things that we need to look at. Most of this will be handled by the end of this school year. Yes, ma'am. Yes, the CTE extension credit.
Is that just, when you said that about the bell schedule and extend or whatever, is that just for the CTE program or are you talking the whole?
That would be just for the CTE programs. CTE students are required to have 720 hours of time in for their program in 2 years. We have a 2-year program. That's 720 hours. So that means all their class time, their instructional time, their work time needs to add up to 720 hours in those 2 years. We've used the shore period to do that because that group of students when we did this, as long as the group of students was with the instructor, we could count those. So that's why I went with that method. Now they're asking for that to be credited time because of all the work-based learning experiences they've had. I think this probably came from the time period over COVID, to be honest with you.
So how many, with the state, how many credits do you need to graduate?
With the state, 22.
22, and you have 27.
Mhm.
Before, like, one, two, or seven. But if it cuts into that, we can't.
He has a solution.
Yep.
There's a solution, so it's not really cutting into it. We just have to he has to re-credit it differently.
Well, if we're able to credit this, do the CTE extension credit, we'll be fine.
You would have to approve essentially
Yes.
a course and approve giving credit for the course so that the kids that are enrolled in CTE would be assigned to their CTE instructor during shore period and would get credit for that, for being there and doing that work in order to meet their hours and to meet the state requirement of getting a credit for any hour. Any hour that counts has to be credited time.
So the only thing, as I take it, that we would be doing differently, because they do it now, they're just not receiving credit. is
Correct.
We would identify that as a course so they could receive credit.
Correct. And that would also include any work-based learning experiences that the students are doing. So we have a lot of students that are in the automotive program, for instance, that may be helping their parents or their dad build a car for racing. That would be credited activities, a work-based learning experience that could be used for credit. That's the direction they're going. Now, they used agriculture primarily. Like, we have students that are in agriculture with a school of ag, and they do something with their animals, the cows, they take them to shows and all that kind of stuff. But they don't get credit for that time, even though it's work-based learning. That's the concept, that the students would get this credit. And they meet with their mentor during this 30-minute period. So we're set up for it, we just don't do the credit. So that'll be the big change we'll need.
So during this 30-minute period, we can track that time. So we can give them credit. How would you track the hours outside, like the work related?
So that would fall under the credit. So basically, we count the time of the class period that they're actually in a structured, credited course. So they may do extra time outside in some sort of program or some sort of project, but they'd still just get the time of the course, the extension class, the 30 minutes that we have. That's how we'd keep track of it.
So they only get credit. So they only really get credit.
For that 30 minutes, yes.
For that, yeah, so then they say they raise a cow outside and the time that they do that, they just get recognized for that. They don't get credit for that.
Right. So that would be a project outside. They bring it into this extension class. You know, they may work with the mentor talking about what they need to do or what they're doing, those sort of things. But the credited time is only for the classroom, the class day.
So say they spend a whole afternoon, you know, whatever it is they have to do, and they spend like 6 hours. They go into the classroom, they talk to their mentor for 20 minutes. They get 20 minutes credit.
It's credited based off of the credited course, yes.
Okay.
The hours are based off the credited course. Okay. Co-op plays into this as well. Students go out on co-op, they get the same amount of credited time as what they would have in class. But they may be at work for 6 hours a day. So, okay. So that's where we're at. It's not nearly as bad as
Mr.
what we
Allen had
think.
a question.
Mr. Allen.
Question about the Skills USA.
Yes, sir.
So I know a little about this.
Yes.
So if the students are participating in that program, they have to do a lot of practice and a lot of training.
Yes.
To build the projects or
Right.
whatever it may be. The time that they put into the practice and everything for that for them projects, would that count towards your credit?
That would be,
Also?
that, yes, because those students would fall inside of that CT extension period. So they would get credit for that period of time, yes. Yes.
If we had Skills USA, would we have to offer the the credit extension?
Yes, because not all students will do the Skills USA. And with Skills USA, we have to get it up and running. It needs to be, we need to be chartered prior to the beginning of the school year. So I expect to have that, I want to try to have that finished ASAP.
And we used to have it, so what happened to the charter that we had? Did it just,
I'll have to look into it because when you had it, we had it way before me. So I don't know. It's a good question. So I don't know where any of that information is. I haven't seen anything of anything in files that
well,
I have.
the advisors were Dorothy, Chappelle, and Dr.
I have all her
Chappelle
files.
and Angie, so they'd be the ones to call and
Yep.
see if they know anything.
But I can get that's not a big deal. I'll get it right.
And I do want to clarify before Mr. Keene finishes, the write-up of the actual audit report from the auditors is what I shared on March 11th, not this presentation. So I will have him send that to me and I'll add it to this week's update. What you have is the write-up from PDE from when they were here. Thank you.
So they didn't have my action plans?
The action, they have the action plan. Hold on, I believe I sent that as well. That would have been more recent.
Yes. Nonetheless, the state is reviewing the action plan right now, making any changes, sending it back to me. Once they're happy with it, I'm bringing it to you for approval.
Now, you jogged my memory. I didn't send the action plan because I knew we had to give it to them for their input before they said it was okay.
Totally fine, because as soon as I get it, you're going to see it.
So,
I have a plan for all of these, so we'll be okay. Right.
What are we gonna do about doing this Skills USA if we have to have that done?
That'll be the,
All the
we need a Skills USA Dolly Oden, I know. We'll figure it out. We're having conversations now with the group, so.
I mean, I do know Skills USA. I mean, it's a lot of good stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Does it have to be a CTE teacher?
It doesn't have to be, but it's kind of like FBLA. It's recommended that you have a business teacher running FBLA, like FCCLA. You have someone in family consumer science running FCCLA because they understand the concepts.
I guess my question was somebody that maybe worked at the college or something like in one of those fields, if they could come in as that person.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that would work with.
I mean, if it's a club advisor position, we would have to post it.
Yeah. Possible. Okay. Any other questions? We're good. All right. Thank you.
Dr. Dady provided for you at your seat the rates for the transportation contracts. Remember, these are 21-22 rates that are updated by the Department of Ed partway through the year. So we have the current rates for this year that have been updated there in front of you. It's just there for you to look at for tonight. Ask any questions you have prior to the next meeting where we would be approving those rates for this year. Any questions at the moment?
If you get bored and you'd really like to see the state formula that is strictly used for this, I will leave these right here and you can look at them before you leave. That's right.
And the final thing on my report, there were 3 policies we did discuss at the last meeting. I have them on here for you to review attached to the agenda. 231, social events and class trips. That was our conversation about the number of chaperones. And what I did in the language, and it's in red on the attachment, is I made the social event and class trip chaperone language match the field trip policy language that we looked at that says that the building principal and myself have the ability to approve the number. And what we would do internally is, we already, since it says that in the field trip policy currently, we're going to update the field trip form that if they're asking to waive the requirement of 10 to 1, like we talked about the Community Arts Center, they could ask for a waiver and they could give us a reason. And then there's a separate line for the principal and I to sign off that we agree that that is valid. We would do the same thing for the request form for a social event or a class trip. And we would identify up front the number that we're requiring them to have at each of those events, and it's right on the form. But this policy, once it's approved, would have, the language would match the field trip policy. Questions about that one? 805.2, school security personnel. That was a conversation attached. That was basically in the same conversation. Right now, the policy says there should be one for every 50 people. We changed the language. I changed the language to say minimum of one if it's an event that's going to have 50 or more people. And then beyond that, the administrator that's signing off and I would identify the number that we're going to require for that event. So, for example, Mrs. Henry and I have talked about, she knows when she's going to have an event that is going to generate more attendance than another, and we can put right on that approval form how many we're requesting for security personnel. So we're able to tailor it to, we don't need to have the same number at every indoor event. We can fluctuate that up and down, but the language of the policy says at least one if it's going to be 50 people or more in attendance, and then beyond that, we can determine that internally. And the reason I'm using that 50 number that was there is because we do have some events that right now we are required by policy to have one at every event. But we see the need to change that and have that start at the 50 number, because you have some events that we really don't think we need to have an event staff member there, but we're bound by policy right now. So if we give ourselves that, you know, for example, I don't think we need to have one at every parent-teacher conference night, but because it's an event in a school, the policy requires us to have one there. So again, the changing of that policy would give us some flexibility. Questions about that? And the last one, 913.2, that is what we did based on the last conversation, is I took the sponsorship and advertising policy, which was 913.1, and I copied that over into 913.2, titled it Sponsorship and Advertising on Athletic Live Streaming, and made the language of 913.1 match what we were trying to do. So I kept some of that permission language the same, and I edited out the things that didn't make sense to live streaming, but this would give us permission to have sponsorships and advertising on live streaming. Then once this policy is approved, again, what we talked about is keep this separate from the other policy so that we're not mixing what's happening. And then once this goes through the process, then we can bring back to you a chart of how that advertising would generate revenue. Questions? Okay, then I'll put those three on the April 11th agenda for a first read. And that's my report,
Thank you, Dr.
as long as it was.
Moving to section D, which is courtesy of the floor, for public comment. Give your name, address, and agenda item you wish to speak to, and you will have 3 minutes. The person that signed up was Mr. Schweitzer.
I'm too old for this. Merle Schweitzer, Mifflin Township. I'm just curious, in Mark's presentation, how much he's allowing for natural gas? Is that information available? I know it's good what you're planning there, because price of natural gas has really gone up.
He had reflected increases at each building for the increase in natural gas prices.
I thought maybe he had a total amount that he's anticipating. On the boilers, the replacement of the boilers, are you still planning to replace the 3 boilers in the high school and the boiler in the middle school? I know there was a discussion about this earlier. Are you planning to move forward on that, or are you just not deciding not to do it?
Correct, moving forward.
Could you please explain the justification for the replacement of these 3 boilers, 4 boilers? Because my background and my experience, I see no reason to replace the boilers at this time. They're in good shape. And I would also like to point out that every summer, Mark has a contractor come in who specializes in servicing of boilers, and he cleans them and sets the combustion efficiency. And if there's anyone that would be recommending that we replace a boiler, would be someone like that.
So the rationale for replacement is the decrease in energy consumption because of their efficiency, the efficiency of the new units.
Do you know what the efficiency is of these new boilers?
You just heard SiteLogic say that we will save $380,000 in the return time that they are required for an energy savings project.
The combustion efficiency of the present boilers is 80%. So can we compare what the combustion efficiency is of the new boilers? Is it like 90% or is it 85%? Do you have that information?
I will have to ask.
But the cost to replace these boilers, I think, if my information is correct, look, it's about $250,000 a boiler, I think, but I'm not sure about that. And I'd be concerned that you're talking about the schedule where you actually bid it and the contractors come in and start doing the work. You're talking about getting up into August and September and October where you're replacing boilers, and you're assuming they're not going to have any problems, and you're assuming that these new boilers are going to work when you get them in. And if it comes October and it comes November and it comes December and the boilers aren't working, you might have a problem. Oh. I don't have any extra time. All I want on the loan, I have to talk about the loan. We're talking about taking out another loan, and who's going to pay for it? Our taxpayers are going to pay for it. We have 12,000 taxpayers. They're coming up with 15 million now. And we're going to ask that, and they've been paying off a debt since, and we're going to go into debt and for another 25 years, and we're going to ask our 12,000 taxpayers to keep paying and paying and paying on this. And we don't have the money. They don't have the money.
Thank you, Mr. Schweitzer. There's no other ones on the agenda for the first courtesy of the floor. Moving on to personnel. Letter D, personal items. We have a number of resignations. One of them is Dr. Dady, our assistant superintendent, will be effective June the 17th. We have a resignation from Amy Pecchia, high school guidance secretary, a resignation from Scott Moreau, head basketball coach, and a resignation from Jonathan Palumbo, high school teacher and head swimming coach, effective the end of the school year. And then a resignation from Jessica Smith, custodian, effective March the 9th. We also have a listed volunteer softball coach, and the retention of our winter sports head coaches, wrestling David Herman and girls basketball Darren Bischoff. And also the Act 93 employee salary for the 22-23 school year. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Any questions?
I want to make a comment. For the resignations of Dr. Dady and Mr. Palumbo and Ms. Pecchia, I just want to thank you for your service to the district. And you guys are going to be very missed.
Anything else? Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Next, we move on to curriculum and instruction, on which there are no items, followed by building and grounds, of which there are no new items. Moving over into finance. As was talked about with Mrs. Hendry in the budget and talked about by this board before, football helmets need to be replaced, that we're working off of all this, the kids having all the same helmet. And so we are taking the funds that were first initiated for a part-time athletic trainer that did not happen this year and transferring over into the supply so they can be purchased now. We are extending an existing contract with Monthly Bank and Trust for the depository for a 3-year period beginning July the 1st. And we have a service exchange agreement with American Fidelity for Section 125. May I have a motion? Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Not in favor, nay. Ayes have it. Moving on to miscellaneous items. We have an agreement between the school district and North Central Site Services for virtual speech therapy services from June 20th through July 21st of 2022. Our Blast Intermediate Unit General Operations budget as proposed. We have 2 donations for Dr. Jennifer McKee's classroom, and we have a change in venue for the class of 2023 to hold the 2021-2022 prom at the Genetti Hotel in Williamsport due to a scheduling conflict. May I have a motion? The seconds are also.
I'll second.
Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Not in favor, nay. Ayes have it. Next is old business, of which there is no item, so moving on to our second courtesy of the floor. If you would like to comment to the board, state your name, address, and what you would like to address, and you will have 3 minutes.
I apologize for getting up here a second time, but under Act 93, where we announced the new salaries for our principals, assistant principals, and directors, I was just curious what the % of pay raise is, if there is a pay raise.
It was not any one single percent. Most of them are around 1.5%.
Like 1%?
1.5%.
1.5%. I noticed that there is no director of food service on the list. Was that intentional, or was that just an omission?
It's not a part of Act 93.
Oh, the director of food service is not a part of Act 93? Is that a change?
No, they're part of Nutrition Inc. and they're hired by Nutrition Inc., which is our contracted food services.
I noticed we have another custodian retiring, and I know we have 17 custodians, and I'm concerned a little bit because I understand that we have 3 custodial positions that have not been filled, and that this custodian that's just retiring, would that be number 4? Do we have 4 custodial positions right now out of 17 that are not filled?
Only 2, Mr. Schweitzer.
Beg your pardon?
2 are not filled right now.
There's 2 out of the 17 that's not filled.
The intention is to fill them.
What?
The intention is to fill them.
Okay, all right. Because our custodial staff is the backbone of our preventative maintenance program. In fact, while we're on this, we have 500,000 square feet of building space at 125,000 a custodian. The normal square footage for a custodian is 125,000 square feet. That's been going on for a long time. So you divide 125,000 into 500,000, that equals 20 custodians. So I'm saying that if we go by that formula, we should have not 17, but we should have 20 custodians in our school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for courtesy? If there was somebody that signed up, but we don't sign up for the second one, so.
Hi, my name is Dr. Lily Langlois, and I live in Waterville. My daughter goes to Salisbury Elementary School, and that's why I'm here, because it was in the newspaper to shut it down, which I understand that this is an annual debate, and I'm here to advocate on behalf of them. So my daughter loves it there. Mrs. Yawn is amazing, and she's the employee of the month. And she knows every student in the building because it is such a small community school. It's not very large, and I think that really affords a lot of benefits. She knows not just the students, but their families as well. And the other, Mrs. Marriott, the other kindergarten teacher, she also is interconnected. She knows my husband. He took her class 25 years ago. He was in the accelerated program. He's very proud of that. And I think when you have these small schools, you can really build these positive relationships, and you have a really interconnected community. And with that, the students really thrive. So it builds on their behavior and their achievements. And if you just annex the Jersey Shore Middle School, I'm sure it's a good school as well, but you make it bigger and bigger, and then it makes it harder to develop those relationships and have those small in-community development, small group learning, and then kids can fall through the cracks. And my son, who will be there hopefully at Salisbury Elementary School in a year and a half, he's half deaf. He's got hard of hearing, and I think that the small school is really beneficial because hearing aids amplify. I'm sorry. It's not like glasses where you have 20/20 vision. It amplifies everything. And if you go in a circus of all these young kids out there, it's not that it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't be that he wouldn't succeed and go to college one day. But I think the small community school helps people like my son who need extra help and need a smaller, more community base. And I think that's all I have to say about it, but think about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can. Yeah, and I had made a note and forgot. I just so the public hears it, I did do an outreach, and I shared this with the board, with the reporter from the Sun Gazette that wrote the story after our last meeting. I have heard numerous comments from the community about the way that our conversation was portrayed and some of the inaccuracies that how the information was presented. If you'll remember, our conversation was posed to the architect, show us the costs of these scenarios. It wasn't ever said that that's what we were going to do. And I believe there was at least one line in the story pointed out to me that the cost of moving kids to one building was 55 million, and that was never anywhere in our conversation. That was the cost of the total entire district project. We were encouraged as a board to write a letter to the editor if we would like to change any of those statements. But again, I would go back to my original comment that I don't believe that our conversation was truly portrayed in writing. Thank you.
Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Hearing none, that'll close the courtesy of the floor, for the second courtesy for that this evening. We will now go into an executive session, after which no new business will take place, so we will now ask for adjournment. Thank you.